Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Robert Doar, and welcome to this Edward and Helen Hintz book forum. I'm very pleased to have you all here this afternoon and tuning in on live stream to hear a conversation about this wonderful book, Faithful Presence, The Promise and Peril of Faith in the Public Square by Bill Haslam, the former governor of Tennessee, who we are honored to have on our stage today. This is an important book and a good book about a topic that's pretty interesting and hot right now. What's happening in people who have deep Christian faith and their relationship with politics, and we want to talk about that. But before I get started, Governor Haslam, I want to tell the audience that I had you at a previous event, and at that time I didn't get you alone. I got you sort of teamed up with two other governors, Governor Stitt of Oklahoma and Governor Kemp of Georgia, at an event we had. And we had all of our friends, and it was a large event, and we did a nice conversation, and you were great, and they were great. And when I came down off the stage, I ran into the two wives of the other governors. And I found in this business that sometimes the wives of public officials tell you the truth. You know, you get the real dope from them. And both Governor Stitt's wife and Governor Kemp's wife said, "Oh, Robert, we're so happy you had Governor Haslam, because he's the smartest of them all."
How about that? Obviously, my wife didn't get to vote in that election.
Yeah, that's right. But it was so nice to hear that. And Governor, you had a great 2 terms as governor and 2 terms as mayor of Knoxville. And then before that, you're a very successful businessman. But this book is about faith. This book is about your commitment to Christianity. And I wanted to start our conversation today by just asking you, where did that faith come from?
You know, I was a 17-year-old and was listening to someone speak, and the speaker's main point was the things that Jesus claims are too wild and radical just to ignore. You have to decide he's either crazy or he was selling something or he's who he said he was, but you can't just ignore him or pretend like he's a good teacher, because he can't be a good teacher and claim the things he did. And so his point was, you need to decide, with the claims are so outrageous, is he who he said he was or not? And if he's who he said he is, changes everything. And if he's not, ignore it and go on about your life. And so at the age of 17, I kind of started exploring and decided for me that he is who he said he was. And if he is who he said he was, then my life needed to be different to follow him.
So you came to a deeper faith than your own family had, or were you a little different than your brother and your parents?
Well, our family was a church-going family, but I don't think I kind of understood the essence of the gospel before I heard it at that point.
And as a young person, you say in the book that you were on your way to seminary. You were thinking that you might be a pastor.
I did. I actually went through college and thought that's what I'm going to do. And I was going to teach for 2 years and then go to seminary. My dad said, our family has a chain of, they were then convenience stores. They're now truck stops all over the country. And Dad said, why don't you come to work for us? That way you can identify with people. You already know what. If you're going to be at a church, it would help to understand the business world. So I came for 2 and stayed for 22. And somewhere in there decided that being a pastor wasn't what I was supposed to do.
Well, one of the nice things about the book is that it is a very you have a natural way, a very, very, very unphony way of quoting Scripture, and it's remarkable and lovely, and so it's not something that you take lightly, you take seriously, and so you've got that, and then you have this business thing, and then you were called to public life. How did that happen?
I'd been in business all my life in Knoxville. Knoxville did not have term limits for mayor, and they passed term limits. We had a mayor that had been there 16 years, and some folks said, hey, it's time for a new day. We need somebody different to run for mayor who's going to really take advantage of the things that are great about the city. I loved it. My family was raised there. I was raised there. And so I decided to run for mayor kind of out of a civic obligation, and I discovered I loved it. Being the mayor of your own hometown is about the best job in the world because it's a wrap your arm around it job. In our case, we decided we were going to make downtown the focus. It had kind of fallen into disrepair, and we focused on that and brought people back into it, made it the heart of the city. And it's a fun, hands-on job where people can also get their hands on you. So you need to be okay with that part too.
So it was, the way you describe in the book is that you were interested in running, you thought you wanted to serve, but you really loved governing. You really loved.
I did. I guess I should. One interesting sidelight of deciding to run for mayor. My brother's college roommate was Bob Corker, who went on to be United States Senator 2 terms from Tennessee. He had just been elected mayor in Chattanooga at this point. This is like 2002. We're both in Florida, spring break for our kids. We don't know each other's down there, and we're staying in houses, 2 doors apart. And so we went on I laughed, we went on a 20-mile bike ride, and I got on the bike thinking there's no way I'm going to run for mayor, and got off and came in and told Chrissy, I said, hey, I'm thinking we need to be serious about thinking about it. So sorry.
That's all right. So 2 terms in the mayor's office, and then you ran for governor, 2 terms there, and we'll talk about issues you faced, but let's talk about the underlying message of the book. If I had to say what it was, it would be that people of faith, especially right now people of Christian faith, who are involved in politics and public life, are not, in their way in which they're doing it, exhibiting the traits of Jesus. They're not there's no humility. You just said, did you hear that? He said it's a wraparound. That's kind of a loving, bring people together sentiment and spirit. But that's not the spirit we're hearing from some parts of the evangelical community. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, listen, the reason I wrote the book was this. One of my biggest disappointments from being in office was, one of the clear messages of the Gospels, the Sermon on the Mount is kind of the most famous. Forget if you're a person of faith or not, but it's one of the most famous sermons of all time. And if you boil it all down, if you want a 2-word summary, it's be different. That's where Jesus talks about salt and being salt and light. Okay, and the point is the salt's supposed to be different than the meat. The light is supposed to be different than the dark. And if the meat goes bad, it's not the meat's fault. The salt, which was supposed to be the preservative, it's the salt's fault. And this call to be different is a real clear call. My big disappointment was Christians and people of faith act just like everybody else when it comes to politics. They're just as likely to be nasty and hide behind anonymity on the internet. They're just as likely, or maybe even more likely, to pass along unfounded rumors and truth. And they're just as likely to say, to take Machiavelli instead of Jesus and say the end does justify the means. And that's what, if I was talking to a group of representative Christians around the country, they say, Bill, you don't get it. Like, the stakes are too high. It matters too much. You're asking us to bring a pillow to a knife fight, and the culture is at stake here. So we have to play by rules to win. We have to play to win here. And I'm saying, well, that's okay. That's just not who we're supposed to be. I mean, I'll give you.
Well, you don't really say that's okay. You reject that.
Well, I'm saying if you want to think that, you can think that.
Right.
But that's not who you're saying we are.
Oh,
you are.
In other words, there's a contradiction of your faith.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. Okay. So and again, this topic has been covered by Tim Alberta in a big Politico article that's out recently, and David French writes about this a lot. And so, am I clear? Is it fair to say that you identify yourself with that part of the evangelical world that is worried and concerned and upset about the excessive, win at all costs political involvement of some components of the evangelical community? Right.
I mean, in the New Testament, in the book of James, James is Jesus' brother, okay? And in the book of James, he's writing, he describes wisdom that's earthly and wisdom that's from above. And he says wisdom that's above is pure, peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere. Now, if I polled you in this room and said, does that describe the Christians in the public square that you know? I think you'd all go, no. And so my point is, we have a problem. We're saying we believe one thing and we're acting a whole different way.
Now, let's bring it to your own political experience as governor and your knowledge of how things. Did you run into that in Tennessee? Did you go into communities and say, no, I'm solid on what I think are the traditional conservative positions, and no one can question my faith, and yet this crowd that lacks those virtues, did they come after you? And give us an example.
I'll give you a real good example. So our legislature passed. Remember, obviously politics are different in every state. Tennessee's a pretty conservative Republican state in every way. And our legislature passed a bill to make the Bible the official state book. You know, states have official birds and insects and, you know, drinks and everything else. And they passed a law to make the Bible the official state book. Well, in some ways, it's kind of irrelevant. I mean, like, I couldn't, before I ran for governor, I couldn't have told you what our official state drink is. I would have guessed Jack Daniels. Turns out it's milk.
That makes me feel better.
Yeah, I guess. So in some ways it was relevant. On the other hand, it did. I mean, I think the Constitution's real clear that you should make no law establishing a religion, and I thought that was doing it. And so I actually vetoed the Bible as the official state book. So I came home and Chrissy said, "How's work?" I said, "Not good. I vetoed the Bible today." You know, it just doesn't go over real well. And so I would see people, and to this day, I saw a man recently that's going, "You know, you did a good job, Haslam, but I don't get why you vetoed the Bible." And so there was a deep sense of, you're not really, you know, fighting for us.
Okay, so what about conspiracy theories and misinformation? Sometimes I'm hearing in this discussion that equal to or similar to other political entities, the evangelical community or the Christian community can be prone to that. Yeah. Are you worried about that?
I'm very worried about it. I mean, we all form our own ghettos of one kind or another. Yeah. And Christians are maybe especially guilty of doing that. We all like to huddle up with the people who think like we do. And within that huddle, we can start sharing truths and or what we believe to be truths. And I heard this, et cetera. And because the church is such what it's supposed to be a network of relationships and fellowship. And because of that, it's a perfect method to spread information. And if it's bad information, because I trust you and you and I go to Sunday school together and you say, "Well, I just heard that at a pizza restaurant down here, they're trafficking in children." Well, hey, Robert goes to Sunday school with me and he told me that, so it's true. So I tell people that as well. It's a perfect conduit for information, whether it's true or not. And
the social media doesn't help because people are able to stay in their, I think you refer to them as their ghettos, their place where they only hear each other. And that's a problem. I mean, it's a big problem. And I'd go further. People ask all the time, like, are politics different today? Yeah. And I would argue they're different. When I first ran for mayor in 2003, it's extraordinarily different than then. And it's even when I first ran for governor in 2010, it's very different. Here's what changed. Jonathan Haidt has a great article in the Last Atlantic. And Jonathan basically says everything changed when Facebook added the like button and Twitter added the retweet. Because, listen, politicians are great at reading the room. That's what we do, right? Okay, I'm coming to talk to here's what they'll be interested in. I'm talking to a group of farmers, et cetera. You learn to read the room, and you should. Like, who am I talking to? But we read the room and say, this is what people care about. And Twitter, as we all know, 20% of the country is even on it. And 20% of the people on it are like 98% of the tweets that go out. Okay, so 6 or 7% of the country is sending 98% of the tweets. It is not a representative sample. And by the way, those folks are overwhelmingly far right, far left. They're people pretending to be someone else, or they're Russian bots. Okay, that's who the largest users are. So what's happened is you've had politicians go, man, I'm looking at Twitter and it's blowing up about so-and-so. People must think this. And it's led us all, because we can all choose whose tweets we see. We like those ones that tell us what we think to be true. And it's led us to some really bad places. So one bad place it may have led us to, and is maybe characteristic, I'm just wondering your take on it, is this sort of lack in confidence in our elections and voting. And you're a politician. You've waited up in the late nights to see how you do. Where is and again, remember, you wrote the book about this community, not me. Right. Where is this evangelical community, Christian community that has an excessive loyalty to the former president? Where do you feel, how do you react to what they're saying about voting and elections and stolen elections or illegitimate
I think
elections.
you have to back up from there and think, where's this coming from? And it's coming from a sense of fear, I think, that the culture and the world are changing really quickly. When I'm growing up in the early 60s, everybody went to church. And, the Los Angeles Times still had a Bible verse of the day in it. Well, Los Angeles Times is not going to put a Bible verse of the day in there anymore. The culture's changing, and so people of faith will look around and they've reacted out of fear, which is two things. Number one, it's never a good place to react out of, and number two, people of faith, do not fear is actually the most frequent commandment in the Bible. Okay, so when we're reacting out of that place, it's not a good place. And it's that fear that's driving people to react and say, there's too much at stake here. We can't just, go Sunday school.
So that's a big issue here at AI. So we have the cultural people, and when they have the economics people, and sometimes they don't agree,
Right,
and
right.
they don't meet. And Tennessee's an interesting state. It's a diverse state.
Yeah.
It's faced the ups and downs of the economy just like other states. It's been mostly up because it's well governed. But do you think it's driven by? Are you saying that you believe that fear is driven more by a cultural unhappiness? A black president named Barack Obama. They're no longer putting the verses in the Los Angeles Times. What's coming out of Hollywood, or by economics?
I think it's both, but the cultural pieces are really big. And I was with somebody who has a job in the creative class of Nashville. He's a songwriter, okay? Mm-hmm. And so this is not somebody whose job is being threatened to move to China in any way.
Yeah.
And he's a thoughtful, really smart guy. And he was talking about, I want somebody that's going to fight for us. And he said, I'm just kind of tired of being beat on all the time, and I want somebody that's going to fight back. And that's
a legitimate feeling. I mean, you can't argue with that, right? Or not?
You can't, except here's the problem: are we giving people credit just for fighting or for actually solving a problem? Yeah. And so fighting has become performative, if you will. It's like, I want somebody that's going to jump up on that table and yell. And if you went to most people, Republicans in Tennessee today, and ask them about Bill Haslam, they say, well, I really like him, but I just wish he'd jump up on the table and yell a little more. But I just never felt like that was actually going to solve a problem. And so rather than people who are going to try to be, the narrative's going to be about, well, let's don't burn the place down. Let's actually fix it. And my concern in all that is this. You were asking about, you started asking about elections and doubting that, okay? Yeah. What's distinguished us from the democracies in Latin America that have kind of come and gone, the things that we look at and go, well, that's not really how it works, is we actually have real institutions here that are stable. Mm-hmm. But if we destroy all of our institutions, then we become like them. And there's nothing for those democracies to fall back on.
So faith in institutions and confidence in institutions is a big issue here as well. And I just want to ask you about the relationship to the community that seems to have lost faith and wants people to fight and is maybe lost its way with regard to sort of core Christian values, and President Trump. Is he helpful or harmful to this? And what is it about him that has attracted a very significant portion of the evangelical community in states like Tennessee?
Well, first of all, I think it is this idea that I'll fight for you. And there's no, people think, and again, you ask, is it a cultural, economic? I know I was at a dinner recently with a guy that is a heart surgeon, another guy that's a fairly big-time lawyer, and they were both huge fans of President Trump because he said he's the only one that goes out there and fights for us. So there is, I think within the church, a story can paint a better picture than anything else.
Yeah.
About 4 or 5 years ago, your predecessor, Arthur, was speaking at the National Prayer Breakfast, okay? And if you remember, it's kind of one of those interesting scenes where you have the podium.
This is a big story at AI. We love this story.
Do you know this story already? Well, then I won't tell it again.
No. We want to hear it.
The punchline
The audience wants to hear it.
You got Speaker Pelosi on one side, Trump's on the other. Arthur gives a speech about love your enemies.
Yes.
And Trump gets up and goes, I really like all that except the love your enemies part. Yeah. And you think, well, I mean, that's, pretty bold thing to say at a prayer breakfast. Like that wasn't Arthur's words; those were Jesus's words. And so I think that's this idea of like we're going to claim the mantle of Christianity without claiming the essence of it.
Well, that's what the book is about, and that there's no question about that. So the last one that I can't quite figure out, and you don't address this as much in the book, but I'm curious about it, and that is the community, the Christian community, not always, and maybe they shouldn't, maybe it's an aspect of forgiveness, not always holding people in authority positions accountable for their personal behavior. What is going on there?
I actually can't. I wish I had an explanation. I mean, this is the same group of folks that, said Clinton was totally unfit for office, but have excused, President Trump and said, well, the rules are different. And I honestly can't do that except that I guess I can't explain that except we're willing to give concessions to people that think like we do. I wish I could have some explanation for that because there's really no justification. I do think, it's hard to sit where we are and not to say character matters. And I would argue, if you think about the tenets of being conservative, personal responsibility and character, I think are right there along with market-based economy, balanced budgets, America playing a leading role in the world. Those key things, I think personal responsibility and character are a huge piece of that.
Is some of it also that it's what sells, that it's what's filling the pews? Well, in your own experience in your Christian community.
I think it's interesting. I think you see there's a real divide. And you even see churches, long-established churches, that have a real divide in them. And there's some folks that feel like I said, no, this is about the future of the country and the heart of the culture, and we have to fight or we're going to lose. And others that are saying, you don't get to change the rules just when the circumstances change.
So in addition to being a Christian who's willing to write about his faith, you're also a Republican. And how do you view the state of your party, given the state, the divisions that exist?
Well,
and what's your path forward? Well,
the things that I said that I think are kind of conservative fundamental principles, I think should be the fundamental principles of the Republican Party. We're supposed to care about the debt. We're supposed to believe in the market economy. We're supposed to believe that America should play a leading role in the world. And we've kind of pushed those to the side and say, we're really mainly going to be about fighting for a culture that may or may not have actually been what we think it was in our mind.
Okay, so I'm glad you put it that way because that's the last question. And what does race and immigration have to do with this? Well,
see, that's a great question because particularly you said as a person of faith, it's hard to say we're going to only care about the people in our country. There's just zero biblical justification for thinking that.
Or only care about the people in our country who look like us.
Right, well, even worse. The scripture's full of admonition about treating people different because they look one way. Or caring, giving somebody a seat of prominence in the church because they're wealthy. It's all about this sense of, for all have fallen short of who we're supposed to be. So we kind of all stand on an equal plane there.
Okay, I want to ask you, is there any other important message? And one of the things I do with people who do books, I always want to make sure they get to say what they wanted to say.
No.
And so is there any aspect of the book that I haven't covered or important theme that you'd want to make sure you convey?
The other thing I would argue is this, and one of the things I'm trying to argue to the church is this. There's a great passage in the book of Jeremiah in the Old Testament. Here's the situation. The people of Israel have been taken captive to Babylon. So this is Nebuchadnezzar, if you remember that name from your history books, okay? Nebuchadnezzar is a really, really bad guy. Think about the worst people you can imagine, and I'll put Nebuchadnezzar up against any of them. He made the Israelites, when they were making bricks, inscribe his name on every brick, okay? So that's the kind of guy we're talking about, okay? Mm-hmm. And they're being held captive there. And Jeremiah is the prophet. He's back in Jerusalem, whatever that is, 1,000 miles away. And Jeremiah writes to them. And I always say, if you write me and I'm being held captive, I hope you write and say, hang tight, we're coming to get you as quick as we can. But Jeremiah writes them and says, get used to it, you're going to be there a while. And then he tells them to plant gardens and build houses and have your children marry and have their children marry. And then he says what I think is the key sentence. He says, seek the welfare of the place where you have been called, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. I think one of the things we're supposed to do is to seek the peace of the place where we've been called. And I don't, one of my takeaways from serving 16 years in office is this: who we elect really matters in terms of the welfare of the places that we call home. And like I said, I loved being a mayor. The only thing I might have loved more than that was being a governor, because you can directly change things. And if people ask me all the time, like, what would you learn being a mayor? Would you learn being a governor? Or what was your biggest mistake? I always say the thing I learned and my biggest mistake were the same thing. I wish I had done more. My sins weren't sins of commission, they were sins of omission. I wish I had really use this incredible leverage you have, because the beautiful thing about public service is you can leverage change in a way that you can't anywhere else. And the example I'll give is this: when I was in Knoxville, a group of us put together a program to say, we're going to get some local philanthropists and tell everybody in Knox County, the county we're in, every graduating senior in high school, we'll pay for community college or technical school if you want to go. And we did it, started the program, and it was wildly successful. We thought, we can't keep this up forever. These people aren't going to keep giving forever. But when we came to governor, I thought, what if we did this statewide? Okay, and we put that program in statewide, and with this idea of, we're not, this isn't free college for all. This is free specific training of skill set that we knew we needed in community colleges and technical school. So we were able to set a program up, didn't cost the general fund any dollars at all, and literally promised everybody 2 years free of community college or technical school. And we're promising that not just for that 17-year-old, but for the 6-month-old that was just born, that program will still be there. You can't do that in private life. I guess you could, but you'd have to endow the thing with, a cajillion dollars. And the ability to leverage public office for good should not be ignored.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit. I think we've been a little hard on the evangelical community. So I want to try to recover a little bit here for myself and maybe for you, but it's up to you. We've been talking about the tone.
I have to go back and watch the video.
We've
now.
been talking a little bit and referring to the tone and
Yeah.
the anger and the bitterness and the mean-spiritedness, which we acknowledge is on both sides of politics and is a problem. But on the substance of an issue, I just want to get your sense of a couple of them. So some politicians are saying that right now there's a lot of discussion about curriculum, school materials, and parents' ability to be involved in school materials concerning sex for K through third graders. Do you object to evangelical leaders or political leaders or citizens or parents raising that issue and saying, hey, wait a minute, there is something wrong with the prevailing culture and we want to push back against it?
Yeah, no, I don't. I think that's, again, where I think parents should weigh in and be a part of that discussion. Particularly, the Florida bill that got all the attention, I have lots of thoughts kind of on both sides of that. But the basic thought that for kindergarten through third graders that we're going to say, these are the things that we're going to say for now are better off talked about at home. I agree with the basic substance of that.
And critical race theory curriculum, a sort of identity politics.
Yeah, my thought there is, part of our problem right now in America is we're kind of careening from guardrail to guardrail because we have this evenly split country. We're like nobody wants to admit it, but we're kind of a 50-50 country, right? The elections are going back and forth. No president is, very few of the recent elections has anybody even gotten 50%. Hardly anybody's gotten over 55% in a while. The Senate's 50-50. The House is 6 or 7 votes, but it's going to probably go the other way. So we're an evenly split country. The problem is because we all live in our silos, we think everybody thinks like we do. Okay, we got power now. We need to make a hard left turn. And I think the Biden administration did that and sent us careening to the left guardrail. The Republicans, I think, are about to take the wheel back and pull it hard the other side. The reality of the situation, I think, about the race conversation is there are some honest conversations we need to have about race in this country. It is an issue. And do Black Lives Matter? They do, because you have to look at it in the context of of what the history of the country is. I mean, we made a bargain, our founders made a bargain when they made the Constitution. They made a compromise and said, in order to get the southern states in, we're going to have to live with this horror of slavery, okay? And then we've had to figure that out as a country till we finally, Lincoln got us past that, and then Martin Luther King took us to a different place. So to not recognize that race has been an issue in our country is wrong, I think. Now, the flip side is, do you want to pull that steering wheel so far that we crash into the guardrail and say, therefore, every white person is implicit in this, et cetera? No, I don't think you want to go there either. And that'd be a lot of these big issues in the country are, I think, a result of both sides thinking the other side is going to overreact.
So I presume as governor you had some responsibility for the state university system or some involvement in it. What about campus shutdowns and lack of free speech and viewpoint diversity? Did you fight against that as governor? Or
yeah, so I'll give you a good example of that. So Vanderbilt University passed a policy that they called all-comers policy. That meant all the student groups on campus had to take whoever wanted to come. So the college Republicans, if I'm a Democrat, and I wanted to come and be a member and vote and even be elected to office, I had to be eligible for that.
Yeah.
And so that became an issue, particularly around some of the religious groups of all different faiths. And the Vanderbilt's policy was you can't be an official student group unless you say not only can everybody be a member, but everybody can also is eligible to be an officer of that, period, regardless of what they believe. Well, you can see where that would cause problems. I thought it was the wrong policy, okay? I disagreed with the policy. Our legislature felt like they felt really strong it's the wrong policy, so they said that first they passed a bill saying no colleges in the state could do that, which worked for our public universities, okay? But Vanderbilt's a private school, and so then they passed a law saying you can't, if you receive any government funds, you can't get those if you have this all-comers policy. Vanderbilt at the time was connected to the hospital. That meant they couldn't get Medicaid funds. And it's another bill that, even though I disagreed with what Vanderbilt did, I didn't agree with our legislature because I just don't want the government telling a private institution what they can do, because at some point in time, the shoe will be on the other foot. And so I vetoed that bill as well. So I agreed with the premise, like the university shouldn't say you can only, have these kind of members and you can't say these sort of things. I have an issue a little bit with using governmental power to shut that down.
So you'll engage in the battle rhetorically, on reason, facts, but you won't use the power of government to enforce in that case.
I think that's who, as conservatives, we believe in light government intervention.
Okay, I want to open up for questions from the audience or questions from our live stream group. If you're on the live stream, you can submit questions by emailing Daniel Bring at ai.org. Daniel Bring, B-R-I-N-G, at ai.org. So I'm looking to the audience for good questions, and there's one from right there, Nicole Penn.
Hello, my name is Nicole Penn. I'm the program manager for social, cultural, and constitutional studies here at AEI. Thank you so much for this fascinating talk. So we care a lot about institutions in our particular subdivision, and I'm curious, in your governmental experience and in your experience as a person with faith who goes to church, who are some institutionalists who you particularly admire at this point in time?
Oh, man. Define institutionalist.
Yeah.
Someone who thinks through the structural issues of an organization, who cares about process, and this can be someone in state government, this can be someone in federal government, someone works at an agency, and I'm also thinking too in religious organizations. Someone who comes to mind is perhaps Russell Moore. So individuals of that cast who are thinking through not just activism or reaching a particular end goal, but the processes through which you
Yeah, so that's a good, so Russell's a friend. He'd be somebody that suggests the same thing out of the faith community, Tim Keller, who's a pastor up in New York at Redeemer Church in Manhattan. I Give me a second. Well, let's go
Can
on
I,
and
well,
I'll
well,
come back.
before you, I want to just say that I noticed that process, this issue, was very apparent when I did the panel with the governors.
Right.
And whenever I talk to governors, in contrast to members of the House of Representatives or the
Right.
Senate, governors they have to be institutionalists. They can't succeed unless they're working through a process. And they're very immersed in the details of the issue, where you can avoid all that if you can just, if all you do is talk. Then you can ignore it. I just found that if you go into state houses, you find
Yeah,
that.
I could pick out some. I mean, I'll give you a person that I'd put in that camp, and from the governing and now from the academic side is Mitch Daniels. I mean, Mitch was really, I mean, he was like, I think the best governor that I served with, very much like, here's what we're trying to do. And then he's done that at Purdue now in terms of, I think, being a model for how a campus should work. And if I think about it, I'll come up with some other ones. But
Yeah,
I think we're at the point, I mean, I had two swings at running for Senate. Bob Corker retired where his seat would have come up right when I went out of office, and Lamar Alexander retired where it would have been 2 years later, and I would have kind of given me a perfect time. And at the end of the day, I decided not to for both those reasons. As governor, then you have to solve problems. You have to. And I think my big frustration is right now is there's no premium put on solving problems.
Okay, another question? Yes, sir?
Thank you so much, Governor. I'm curious, as we see like religious populations decreasing, particularly Christian populations amongst even Republicans,
Right.
While at the same time you look at any congressional or gubernatorial races website, one of the top 5 things, whether it's veteran or Christian, they're going to have that as a tagline. I'm curious whether you think religion plays a strong role, certainly in probably the sustainment of the Republican Party over the next few years, but do you think having religion as a main tagline leads to long-term expansion of the party?
Yeah, let me comment first of all from the standpoint of the church, like talking about the big church now. I think it's been really bad for the church. Okay, I think the church, I know a lot of people who are at the age like, it's gotten so caught up in politics, I'm out of here. And so I think that's been really bad for the church. I think there have been times when our party is guilty of, the line always was, you want to be used by God, you don't want to use God. And I think there have been times when we're guilty of using God. And that's, it's a short-term strategy at best, and it's dangerous in the bigger sense of the word to the institution of the church.
Okay, another question? Got one, where are we going? Right, right here, I'm sorry. You're so close, how could I miss you?
Thank you for everything you said today. My name's Ella. I work at the Ethics and Public Policy Center in the Catholic Studies Department.
Cool.
So a little bit different than what's going on in evangelical circles,
Yeah.
but we have our own politics and religion issues that we're dealing with. So just in my work in general, and in general assessment of religion in the political sphere, it seems to me as though, you can't legislate beliefs, you can't legislate culture. So why is there such a focus on cultural issues within legislation? Should that focus be there? Because it seems to me like faith is better communicated and spread, changing hearts and minds at a grassroots level, and a huge thing that causes this incongruence in national politics and disagreement is this attempt to legislate issues that maybe would be better off left to cultural leaders and communities and neighborhoods. So do you think that we should be legislating these big cultural and moral issues? And if so, why? If not, why not?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. I agree with you, and one of the questions I ask in my book is there's lots of evangelical leaders who have spent a lot of time arguing in Washington, but it's been years since they actually talked about the gospel with somebody who didn't believe. Okay, and so that kind of sums up what the problem is, that we're putting our faith in the halls of Congress rather than in the hearts of people. And I honestly think that's the root problem. That being said, then going back to kind of ethics and public policy, it does become some issue. Like if you believe, I mean, obviously the conversation today is around abortion. If you think that life begins at conception and that's a life, then that becomes an issue that does become a political and legal issue.
Right. And I guess I would think of abortion as separate from all those topics because
Fair.
I don't think it's a purely religious issue.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking of more cultural arguments about maybe schools and free speech and church and government. I think abortion is more complicated, but I know that's the first one that comes to mind, especially with current events.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the other one that's a fair question is about marriage, right? And the whole marriage issue and who should the state allow to be married. And I think it's one thing for the say, here's who the church, Catholic Church or whoever should say, says, you know, should the state be involved in that decision? I'm not quite as convinced. I think that's for the church to decide what they think should happen there.
But just to follow up on that, since you brought it up, the court is looking like it's going to overturn Roe v. Wade and return this big decision to states, or at least that's the theory of the opinion, and not decide it by 9 justices in Washington, which someone could argue is one of the reasons why there's all this anger against elites and against Washington deciding hard issues for all of us, and from the heights of the sort of liberal orthodoxy. Are you sympathetic to that decision happening that way and allowing communities to decide this in their own way, or states?
I'm a governor. I think everything that you can pass on to let states democratically decide. But I mean, remember, no less person than Ruth Bader Ginsburg at the time said Roe v. Wade is going too far and is not going to solve the cultural controversy that we have here. And Joe Biden actually argued that at the same, and he was trying to pull it back some with a legislative solution. So I honestly think that the model would be, listen, like I said, I'm somebody that's, decidedly in the pro-life camp. But if you want to look at the model, look at kind of what's happened in Europe, right? The different European states have come to European countries have come to different conclusions, all of which primarily allow abortion but put a time limit on it. And England probably has the most, liberal or progressive ideas in terms of when it can happen. Some of the Catholic countries, Poland would have more, shorter time limits on when it can. But they've all democratically decided, here's what we believe. And if you look at what America thinks about abortion, if, again, different than what I personally believe, but if you look at what America thinks, they think, by a majority, it should be legal, but it should be legal in a limited time frame.
And the fact that was taken away from communities and ruled by one, it could lead to some anger and upset at elites that might make evangelicals pretty mad.
The whole thing about the states as being laboratories of democracy, I think kind of fits. So if Tennessee, if our elected folks say we're not going to have that, that's great. California obviously is going to. People get to choose where they live.
Okay, we're going to take one more question. If we've got one. There we go. Jeff, that's great.
Hi, Governor. The question about coalition building to accomplish some of these issues, whether that's at the state and federal level in the arena of national politics, or at the local level, like we're talking about school boards, and the examples I give is these are often legitimate issues that people have passion about to get engaged.
Right.
But you talk a lot in your book about the problems of rage as a communal motivator.
Right.
And right now, it's very concerning that these groups who are upset with this potential decision from the court on Roe are protesting in front of justices' homes, and yet many on the American left are in some ways stoking or at least sort of running cover for that because they agree with the issue even if they themselves wouldn't go yell at a justice's home. But then the same might be true for conservatives with issues like before school boards and some of, while those are legitimate issues about what should be taught in our classroom, is it right to go do the same thing outside of a school board or an election official because you don't like the outcome and yell it there? So how did you and how would you think about when we have this problem of communal rage in our politics, how do you go about building coalitions with people who you say, I might agree with you, but by lending support to that, are you kind of coming behind the mob in a way?
Yeah, your point's great. I always start with, listen, outrage is not a strategy. You know, it's just not. It's not going to solve anything. Now it's going to help cable news. It's going to help fundraising appeals. Outrage is great, but it's not a strategy. And so what I try to say to folks that, you know, that I'm trying to build a coalition around is nobody's ever been persuaded out of their opinion by outrage on your side, right? I mean, have you ever changed your mind because somebody said you're an idiot? Here's why. I haven't. I mean, you just don't. None of us do. And it's a little like that when people say, well, Haslam, we're in a knife fight and you're proposing all these Sunday school rules. And I always say, well, how's it working now? You know, how's this idea of they yell at us and we yell back at them? How's that going? And the answer is it's not. I mean, right? I speak a lot. I probably speak somewhere 4 or 5 times a week. And I always start, you know, by saying, how many of you are frustrated and exhausted by the current state of politics? It's 100% answer every time, okay? Just guaranteed, okay? And so my response would be, that's not working. Outrage is not working. It's helping CNN and Fox and MSNBC. It's helping, you know, both sides raise money, but it's not solving any problem. And that's what I'm saying. My encouragement is, let's see if we can actually be persuasive here. To sit down thoughtfully to the other side and say, listen, take an issue even as heated as abortion. I can yell at you and call you a baby killer, or I can say, let's have a different conversation. And no person who's thinking about getting abortion has ever changed her mind because she was called a baby killer. And I don't think, you know, it's just not going to happen, right? Might if you had a different conversation. So to me, it's all about, you know, if we're trying to change the outcome, then what can effectively let that happen?
Okay, with that, does someone wants to ask one? Yep, okay, let's do that. One last, and then
thanks for being here, Governor, and thank you for your remarks and discussion. It's been really enlightening. My question is, you mentioned that, you know, politics is different and public life is different since '03. Since you first got involved. Right. And you kind of placed that on social media and just kind of the internet in general and how we've kind of approached that. So what would be your recommendation to Christians to engage in kind of a newly expanded, you know, dimension of public life, that being like social media?
Yeah, I think, again, one of the pieces of advice, he didn't say this coming from a Christian perspective, but it was an incredibly Christian thing. My political mentor was Howard Baker, who, nobody in this, well, maybe a couple of us are old, but Baker was a senator from Tennessee, became majority leader, was Reagan's chief of staff. Bush sent him to Japan as ambassador. And Baker had a saying like that. Baker's from a little country town called Huntsville, about an hour north of Knoxville, coal mining town. And he had a saying that said, always remember the other fella might be right. Okay, as a person of faith, that's fundamental. I mean, that's fundamental. You have to realize, like, part of the thing you believe as a Christian is that you're a fallen and broken person who doesn't get things right. And I always say, I can say it because she's not here, but I've made 1,700 mistakes today. If Chrissy was here, she'd say, you're about half light, okay? You're probably double that. And so I know that could be right. So using social media to yell into the echo chamber louder, there's no part of that that's being salt and light. There's zero part of that. And if you really are saying our call is to be different and our call is to seek the welfare of the place where we've been called, then ask yourself, is the way that you're acting on social media reflective of that?
okay, this has been a lovely conversation. Thank you all much. We have some books here for all of you that are here. I'm sure Governor Haslam would be happy to sign a few. If you
that might double my book sales right there. Can I say one last thing?
Yes, of course.
I want to say this. What you all are, I think part of the way we're wired I think, because of who created us, but regardless of what, is, we all want to make a difference. And I really do think the work you all are doing here really does make a difference. I was telling Robert this when we were talking earlier. When you're in office, people ask you what you think about everything. Like, what do you think about Ukraine? What do you think about this? And the truth is, half the time you don't know. Like, you're wrestling your own alligators. I'm trying to figure out how to get, an interstate paved and how to let you get your driver's license in less than 3 days, and, all the real problems, and make a budget balance, et cetera. The work that you all are doing in terms of helping people think is really important. And being in office, I tell people it's a lot like drinking alcohol. It makes you think you're smarter, but you're not. Because people ask you, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And like, you don't know. But the fundamentally your work that you all are doing in terms of providing a thought platform is incredibly important. So if you're kind of wondering, am I wasting my time here in terms of serving?
Nobody's wondering that.
Okay, for the two people that might have one time thought that,
Yeah.
You're serving the common good by what you're doing here, and I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Very appreciative. Thanks a lot, Kevin.
That's fun.
I hope that was